Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith. This is day 263, so let's get started. We're covering today questions 11 and 12 of the supplement to the Summa, that is, of the seal of confession and of satisfaction as to its nature. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10, and so here we go. Article 1, whether in every case the priest is bound to hide the sins which he knows under the seal of confession. God does not reveal our sins to others, and thus neither should the priest, through whom God is acting in the sacrament of confession. Plus, just practically speaking, men would be way less inclined to utilize the sacrament of confession and to speak with such simplicity and sincerity if priests could divulge their penitent sins by word or sign or any manner whatsoever to others. Canon law makes this requirement explicit. This is from Canon 983. The sacramental seal is inviolable. Therefore, it is absolutely forbidden for a confessor to betray in any way a penitent in words or in any manner and for any reason. Article 2, whether the seal of confession extends to other matters than those which have reference to confession. What I believe this article is referring to is, if during the sacrament of confession the penitent reveals something to the confessor that does not bear on the sacrament specifically, so it has nothing to do with his or her sins, just something they said to the priest within the context of the sacrament, can the priest then use this knowledge elsewhere or outside of the sacrament? And here canon law is very clear as well as Canon 984. A confessor is prohibited completely from using knowledge acquired from confession to the detriment of the penitent, even when any danger of revelation is excluded. This canon, combined with the last one, seems to lean very heavily against a priest using any knowledge whatsoever received in the confessional, not just that related to the penitent's sins outside the confessional. Article 3, whether the priest alone is bound by the seal of confession. The penitent is not bound to the seal of confession, which makes sense because they must then leave the confessional and act on the advice given to them in the confessional, so that in a way they are kind of required to manifest by their life or forthcoming deeds what was said to them or occurred in the confessional. The penitent can also share the wisdom they received in the confessional with others, if they believe it would be useful to them. However, an instance when someone else, besides the priest and penitent, would be bound to the seal of confession would be if an interpreter was needed for the priest to understand in the confessional what sins were being voiced by the penitent, which is also covered in canon law, where it is stated the interpreter, if there is one, and all others who in any way have knowledge of sins from confession are also obliged to observe secrecy. Article 4, whether by the penitent's permission a priest may reveal to another a sin which he knows under the seal of confession. Can the penitent give the priest permission to tell someone else what the penitent said in the confessional? And it looks like canon law would not permit that. Plus, it would be a cause of scandal, even if it was permitted. St. Thomas concludes here, now the penitent can make the priest know as a man what he knew before only as God knows it, and he does this when he allows him to divulge it, so that if the priest does reveal it, he does not break the seal of confession. Nevertheless, he should beware of giving scandal by revealing the sin, lest he be deemed to have broken the seal. In other words, if the penitent wants the priest to be able to know a certain sin of theirs, for example, as to be able to then find additional help or resources for the penitent outside the confessional, then the penitent can just call the priest and let them know of the sin outside of the sacrament of confession. This is what Aquinas means by letting the priest know as a man, meaning telling him outside of the context of the sacrament of confession. Article 5, whether a man may reveal that which he knows through confession and through some other source besides. So imagine you're a priest and you witness Tom, let's say, murder someone. And then later that evening, Tom goes to you for the sacrament of confession and reveals to you in the sacrament that he murdered this person. Can you call the police to tell them that Tom is a murderer? And both Aquinas and common sense tells us that the priest can, and why is because the priest saw the murder with his own eyes outside of the sacrament of confession, which is our response to this article. And with that, we move on to question 12 of satisfaction as to its nature. Article 1, whether satisfaction is a virtue or an act of a virtue. Satisfaction answers to a debt. That is the line from this article to keep in mind. Making satisfaction is about fulfilling the debt of punishment due to sin. And since in this way it undoes sin, it eliminates the punishment due to sin, it is a good work. And since it is a good work about paying debts, it is an act stemming from the virtue of justice, which is about debts or rights, which we will get into in greater detail in the next article. Article 2, whether satisfaction is an act of justice. In a word from our article, no virtue but justice considers the notion of that which is due. But satisfaction gives due honor to God, as Anselm states. Therefore, satisfaction is an act of justice. Further, no virtue save justice establishes equality between external things. But this is done by satisfaction, which establishes equality between amendment and the previous offense. Therefore, satisfaction is an act of justice. And it's helpful to look at the word satisfaction itself in order to understand what it is. Satis means enough in Latin, and faction comes from the root verb in Latin facere, which means to do enough in regards to self-punishment or punishment, penance, as given by the priest. These are forms of what we call vindictive justice, making amends for the one who was wronged, in this case God, through punishment. And since when it comes to satisfaction, making satisfaction, the evil is remedied and the one seeking its remedy are both in the same person, this kind of vindictive justice is fittingly titled under the virtue of penance. In summary here from St. Thomas, penance, which implies equality in the agent only, since it is the penitent who holds the penance, so that penance is in a way a species of vindictive justice. This proves that satisfaction, which implies equality in the agent with respect to a previous offense, is a work of justice as to that part which is called penance. Article 3 in our last article, whether the definition of satisfaction given in the text is suitable. To begin with that definition we are disputing here, it goes as follows. Satisfaction is to uproot the causes of sins and to give no opening to the suggestion thereof. This definition is valid but incomplete. It describes only the second aspect of satisfaction, which is the healing of the individual, and by producing contrary acts of virtue, uprooting vice, and keeping one away from future sin. The first aspect of satisfaction is about making right with God, making up for the wrong one has done via punishment. When a man robs a grocery store, his punishment satisfies the debt of justice due to such a crime. In the same way, through voluntary suffering of that which is contrary to us in some way for the glory of God, we make up for or satisfy what justice demands be done to us for our evils against God. The other part of satisfaction that we've mentioned here is adequately countenanced in these additional words we hear from the article. Satisfaction is compensation for an inflicted injury according to the equality of justice, and satisfaction consists in giving God due honor. Pretty straightforward. And with that, we close another episode. We have just finished covering questions 11 and 12 of the supplement to the Summa, that is, of the seal of confession and of satisfaction as to its nature. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.